So I want to thank Ann Arbor for Public Power for the opportunity to share my comments with you about the DTE rate case. I also want to acknowledge Jackson Koppel, who's a consultant for Solidarity, which is an energy justice group in Highland Park, Michigan. He's the one who prepared this slide and all the ones you'll see during this presentation. He did it for their education sessions. Okay, today's goals. So back in June, 85 different organizations, elected officials, and individuals sent a letter to the Michigan Public Service Commission, MPSC for short, asking it to hold a public hearing on the current DTE rate case. The MPSC agreed to do this, I'm told, for the first time ever. The hearing will happen next Monday, August 22nd, from 6 to 8 p.m. At Wayne County Community College in downtown Detroit. Now, this is a really important event. I'll quote from the letter, quote, "The outcome of this case will substantially impact Michigan families, public health, our economy, our climate, and communities disproportionately facing environmental injustices. It is critical that the commission hear not only from technical experts, but those who stand to be most impacted by this process." So the goal of tonight's session is to provide some background. If you're planning to attend Monday's hearing, if you intend to just submit written comments, or if you just want to know what DTE has in store for you. It's very unusual for the general public to get involved in these cases. They're complicated. Usually it's something that lawyers, consultants, environmental organizations with paid staffs, city governments intervene on. And we're not an intervener, but it's fairly unusual for the public to participate on any level. And that's what we're trying to encourage with today's session. I'm going to try to deconvolute the case the best I can. And I want to be clear, I'm not an expert on it. I've been frantically reading through DTE's rate filings, but there are a lot of them, over 2,000 pages of testimony and exhibits, and tens of thousands more pages from intervening parties. It's just, I mean, it's a huge stack. Many of DTE's proposals are only understandable in the context of past rate cases. So I'm new to this game, and I'll just try to highlight a few things that jumped out at me. I certainly welcome corrections or clarifications from anyone who may be better informed. I'm hoping for an active discussion. So yeah, next slide, please. So I'll go to the next one. Yeah, what is a rate case? So why a rate case to begin with? It's because we give private companies like DTE a gift that's almost unheard of in our capitalist society. We shield them from competition, provide them guaranteed profits in exchange for their performing an essential public service. That's why, in return for these monopoly profits, they're responsible for acting in the public interest. Yet, as a corporation, they're accountable only to their shareholders. And so their only incentive is to maximize profit. That contradiction between public responsibility and investor obligation is why the MPSC regulates DTE, and why DTE's rates need MPSC approval. And so we're going to discuss that today. Next slide. This slide just shows how since 2006, DTE's rates for industrial customers have stayed relatively flat, but they've soared for residential customers and families. Next slide. Yeah, so this rate case is not just about how much more money DTE wants from ratepayers like us, but it's about how they're allowed to spend the money it gets and where. And that's where we think public input is critical. So next slide. Yes. So DTE's last rate hike was approved back in 2020, just early 2020, just before the pandemic. How is the company doing? Well, here are some financial metrics. DTE Electric reported net income of $864 million in 2021, a 21% increase in profits in just 2 years. DTE Energy's overall revenue went up 23% last year to $15 billion. Executive salaries also rose. The company's CEO, Gerardo Nocia, made $11 million last year. More than half of that coming in stock awards. Several other executives also received stock compensation in excess of $1 million on top of their salaries. Company leadership is thus directly incentivized towards maximizing shareholder value, and they're succeeding. DTE stock price has risen 12.5% over the last year, while the S&P 500 fell during that span. Now, Wall Street is closely watching this rate case. I've read the analyst reports, and they make it clear that the company's stock price will be directly affected by the outcome. DTE is trying its best to justify the new rate, but the fact is it doesn't need an 8.8% increase. But its executives know that as soon as MPSC gives them what they want, or most of it, shareholder wealth and will go up. Of course, DTE has to make a case for why it needs the money, how it intends to spend it, and how it proposes to change the way it charges customers. Some of these proposals are really alarming, so let's get into it. Next slide. So 2 years ago, as I mentioned in the last rate case, the MPSC authorized a 4.7% rate increase. That translated to an extra $188 million annually for the company. This year, this slide shows that DTE is requesting an overall 7.5% rate hike, including an 8.8% residential rate increase. That will bring in an extra $388 million. It's worth noting that DTE's current rate, about 17.5 cents per kilowatt hour, including monthly fixed charges, is already among the highest in the state and about 35% higher than the national average. Next slide. Yeah, this just shows that this rate increase amounts to an extra $283 million a year for DTE shareholders, because DTE is asking for an increase on return on equity from 9.9% to 10.25%. Next slide. So this is DTE's proposal in a nutshell from our point of view. Pay us more money, give us the same poor service, and punish anyone who tries to leave the system, i.e. install rooftop solar. And we'll get into that more. Next slide. So DTE has done a lot of public messaging around its commitment to racial equity and inclusion. Internally, it says it's building these principles into its business decisions through ESG, which is Environmental, Social, and Governance Initiative. DTE's foundation has given over $1 million in grants to racial and social equity nonprofit groups. But in the discovery part of this rate case, Solidarity and a Detroit nonprofit group called We Want Green Too sent DTE the question you see on the screen. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. In response, DTE confirmed that it did not conduct any analysis of the disparate impacts in terms of race or class on any element of its proposals, including the rate hike. So by its own admission, DTE did not take race and class equity into consideration in this rate case. Next slide. This just shows that if you are living at 50% of the poverty level, you're spending about a third of your income on energy. If you're at 200% of the poverty level, sort of low middle income, you're still spending about 7%, which is more than the affordability standard, which is no more, you should be spending no more than 6% on your energy costs. Next slide. Okay, so the biggest change that DTE is proposing, and the most extreme, in my opinion, is for customers with rooftop solar or who want to install rooftop solar. And I'm going to talk about this in some detail. You may have heard that there is currently a 1% cap on rooftop solar in DTE service area. That means that no more solar is allowed once residential solar generation reaches 1% of the company's average peak load. This is a huge benefit to DTE. It is already severely limiting the amount of rooftop solar that competes with its own electricity generation. I think we're approaching that 1% cap now. You may also know that Michigan phased out what's known as net metering in 2016. Under net metering, homeowners with rooftop solar were reimbursed retail rates for the surplus energy they put back on the grid. But for the last 4 years, new solar customers instead receive an outflow credit of only 50 cents on the dollar for the energy they return DTE to DTE. That's about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, in this new rate case, DTE is proposing to actually raise the 1% cap on distributed generation to 3%. Now, that sounds good on the face of it, but it's not an offer made in good faith. That's because they'll only raise the cap on 2 conditions. One, that they can cut the outflow credit by half again from 8 cents to about 4 cents. So for the surplus solar energy that you put back on the grid, you'll now receive only about 1/4 the amount that DTE bills you for its electricity. For anyone considering installing rooftop solar, this drastically changes the return on investment to the point where many people just won't bother doing it. So it also penalizes people now getting the 8 cents back, and that under this new rate structure, they'll only get 4. DTE's second condition for raising the cap is that all customers will be placed in an entirely new rate class called DI-12. This new rate class will charge solar customers based on the customer's 3 highest 60-minute demands for electricity during the previous year. What does that mean? It means that someone with recent rooftop solar will pay DTE each and every day the equivalent to the hours they use the most energy. Independent experts estimate that these charges could easily be $100 a month or more compared to the current system, and would put rooftop solar completely out of reach. DTE claims that D112 is revenue neutral compared to the current rate system, and that may be true for the customer base as a whole. But if you're a customer with rooftop solar, you will be punished, not once, but twice, the slashed outflow credit and the D112 rate class charge. So why is DTE doing this? It's not to be mean. The main reason is that solar directly cuts into its profits. Second, it also wants to eliminate the solar installation industry. Dr. Missy Stultz is Ann Arbor's director of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations. In her MPSC testimony in May, she said this, quote, "If the DTE rate proposal was approved, the residential solar installation industry would effectively cease to exist. I believe solar installations will reduce drastically, as much as 60%, end quote. This is all part of DTE's strategy. The company wants to eliminate the rooftop solar option. Lifting the 1% cap is meaningless because few people will install rooftop solar under the company's new conditions. So there's no way we'll get to 2% solar, or much less 3%. Dr. Stultz also said this in her testimony, quote, "If the D112 rate structure were to go through, the local DG, that's distributed generation industry, would be annihilated, making achievement of the cap moot," end quote. But of course, at the same time, DTE wants people to view them as environmentally responsible, and the company can't ignore the demands of climate-conscious Ann Arborites. No problem for DTE. Dr. Stultz testified, quote, "It is not offering a solution in good faith, but is instead trying to trap the commission, interveners, and ratepayers into a pathway that forces all customers interested in renewable energy into the My Green Power program. So instead of climate conscious customers installing rooftop solar and directly reducing their carbon emissions, DTE wants them to sign up for My Green Power offsets, where DTE can profit from any new renewable energy that gets built while continuing to deliver dirty power to subscribers. My Green Power, for those who don't know, is DTE's carbon offset program. Another city employee, Fang Wu, the city's energy manager, testified this, quote, "The proposed rate structure appears to be designed to penalize customers exercising their right to self-supply to reduce their carbon footprint by making DTE's My Green Power program more competitive. DTE's materials show that this is likely part of a deliberate attempt to eliminate competition," end quote. So I have a lot to say about My Green Power and why it's a false solution to the climate crisis, but we can leave that to question and answer in case anyone's interested. I'll just point out that to my knowledge, DTE has not indicated that My Green Power will accelerate the mothballing of any of its coal plants, no matter how many subscribers it enrolls. The Bell River plant will be burning coal for electricity until 2028, and Monroe, the fourth biggest coal-fired power plant in the country, until 2040. And DTE is doubling down on natural gas. It closed its St. Clair coal plant this May, which is good, but almost immediately fired up a brand new 1,100 megawatt combined cycle natural gas plant next door. And in this rate case, DTE is asking for $2.5 million to study repowering the Bell River plant to run on natural gas for decades to come. So My Green Power isn't reducing emissions, and that's the only thing that matters for the climate. Okay, to sum up, in this rate case, DTE is trying to make it impossible for people to economically install rooftop solar. It seeks to cripple the solar installation industry in our area, and it wants to funnel people into a flawed offset program that they profit from both in terms of money and publicity. Okay, Lauren says, please talk about why My Green Power is a dead end. Yeah, maybe we can, let's do that in the Q&A. My Green Power technically is itself not part of this rate case. It's relevant to me because DTE's strategy is to get people away from rooftop solar and into DTE's offsets, but we can talk about that later if people want. Okay, so let's see. That's all the first bullet point on this slide. The second bullet point is add extra fee to DTE for resilience benefits of a household battery. Okay, this is about DTE's residential batteries pilot program. In this program, DTE would install 10 kilowatt capacity batteries, one per customer, and then charge them a subscription fee of up to $50 a month so they could have power during an outage. The batteries would belong to DTE, which would not allow participating customers to install their own. DTE would also control battery charging and discharging. Basically, DTE is offering customers resiliency at a fee, thus potentially profiting from its own frequent outages at customers' expense. Other utilities rent batteries to customers, but on better terms, either much lower fees or by giving battery energy credits to offset those fees. So that's the battery pilot. No community solar program. Community solar is where individuals subscribe to a local solar installation, usually freestanding, and none of that has been proposed in this rate case. So yeah, I guess you can take down that slide. Lastly, I'm gonna talk about that. Maybe you can leave that up for a minute. Infrastructure. A huge part of the rate case has to do with DTE's infrastructure plans. Now they've publicize the fact that they're investing $7 billion in Southeast Michigan's electric grid. But that's more than a little misleading. It's a complicated area. I haven't reviewed it closely. But in general, DTE's approach is to fix things as they break. But there's currently no major effort to modernize or upgrade its infrastructure, at least not in the near term that I'm aware of. Solidarity is more up to date on this. We're trying to make common cause with them. That's the Highland Park nonprofit. We have some issues in common: high rates, frequent outages, barriers to rooftop solar. But Detroit and Highland Park have more urgent infrastructure issues because the cables and circuits are generally older, often well beyond their intended lifespan. So this is where we get to DTE's investments in infrastructure. Most residential areas in Detroit and Highland Park still use old and underpowered 4.8 kilovolt distribution circuits, not the 13.2 kilovolt systems that are standard in the suburbs and in most of Ann Arbor. If you're in one of these 4.8 kilovolt areas, you may not even be able to install solar on your roof because your wires could overheat. In this rate case, DTE is proposing to spend on what it calls hardening for areas serviced by these 4.8 kilovolt circuits. This would mainly be tree trimming and some circuit replacement. But upgrading to 13.2 kilovolts would mainly be limited to the downtown Detroit area and to industrial customers. Solidarity, as I understand it, wants MPSC to mandate a more immediate and more equitable plan for upgrading DTE's distribution grid. So I wish someone was from Solidarity were here to talk more about that, but this is mainly an issue for the Detroit area. It's also an issue for us because, again, DTE applies the don't fix it until it breaks philosophy for the most part. So I'm almost finished. I guess we just want to sum up. Greg, if you can move to the summary slide. I think there's one. Keep going. This is all about infrastructure. There you go. So this rate proposal, A, hurts affordability. B, increases racial and economic injustice. C, adds barriers to solar and batteries. And D, maintains poor quality infrastructure. And all this is for the benefit of DTE shareholders, not the public. I guess I'll pass it back to Greg to talk about the details on the public hearing. I think there's a slide about
that. Yes. So how do we get involved, right? So as Ken was mentioning earlier, we do have a pretty unique opportunity to actually make our voices heard, right? As Ken mentioned, a lot of this is usually done in the legal realm by very technical actors. However, despite how technical a lot of these rate cases tend to be, they turn into some very real and on the ground effects, right? The results of these rate cases affect, our everyday rates, they affect the reliability of our power, and they affect the availability of renewable power. These are where the decisions are made about whether DTE is going to maintain its commitment to the climate. And as of up to this point, the answer has been resoundingly no, they are not going to do that. Obviously, we at Ann Arbor for Public Power believe that DTE will never do this, and that the only real solution is to try to find a way to move off of their system, at least to apply that leverage to force them to start to get better on these issues. However, in the meantime, it's definitely very important that we stand up and make our voices heard and tell the MPSC that we're not okay with DTE continuing in this direction, that we are in a climate crisis, that the actions of DTE are by far and away one of the largest contributors of climate change in Southeast Michigan, and it needs to be seriously called into question, and we cannot allow the entities that are supposed to be regulating them to allow them to continue operating this way. So all that to say, we have opportunities to engage. So, there's three basic ways that you can engage in a rate case, right? Intervention, that's what Ken was mentioning earlier, where you directly intervene in the case you go ahead and, sign up as a formal intervener. Solidarity, as Ken mentioned, did this, but primarily this is cities, and the city of Ann Arbor is intervening in this rate case, as Ken did read some of their testimony. Written comments, however, and spoken comments are something available to us. Written comments, I will get you all the link before the end of this meeting to be able to submit a written comment. This is this gets formally recorded. The MPSC is supposed to read and consider all of these. And it's certainly a way to make your voice heard, and is certainly, recommended to do. Additionally, we have kind of this less common ability to give spoken comments. There's going to be a public hearing, and we can go and show up and make our voices heard. And everybody who's willing, that's going to be Monday, the 22nd, out in Detroit. And we're going to be arranging some carpools for anybody who would like to join to come down and give public comment and tell the MPSC that this isn't acceptable. And it's going to be out in Detroit, so it is a bit of a hike, but it's also that's kind of gives all the more reason why, if people from Washtenaw County show up to say, hey, we're upset with this, we want, you to reconsider this case and to not allow DTE to raise their profit margin, raise their rates on us, all while they continue to not invest in their infrastructure and block access to renewable power. That's going to go and speak volumes. So yeah, that's and this is, not a campaign that it's only us, 10 people in this meeting that are working on. We the People Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, Solidarity, and others are all working on, showing up and putting pressure on this rate case because, as I mentioned before, it does have a dramatic effect on us. So yeah, as I mentioned, that rate case is going to be August 22nd, 6 to 8 p.m. on Monday at Frank Hayden Community Room number 236, Wayne County Community College District, downtown Detroit campus. And I'll post this in the chat for all of you here in a second. And then also I'll ask if anybody would I'll put a little Google sign up, and you can indicate if you'd like carpool help to get down there. And in the other event that we got this PowerPoint from, there was a little bit of practiced public hearing comments. We can do that if we want, but I do want to open it up for Q&A. If you have questions for Ken, I can also try to answer some of them, and we can have a little bit of a discussion here about kind of what this means. So anybody want to kick us off with a question that they have from Ken's presentation, or that they feel like wasn't touched on in Ken's presentation that you're curious about?
I guess I have a question about submitting the written public comments.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know, what do you, in your opinion, do you think would be most effective when submitting the written comment? Like, what sort of things should we focus on?
Public comments tend to be very good when they include some sort of personal story, right? Identify an issue that you see with this rate case, relate it to a public story, whether that's reliability, rates, access to renewables, and touch on that, right? What we have available to us that these large institutions don't have as easily is that kind of human touch, right? We can drag this down into the personal, into the real lived experiences of people, and force them to acknowledge that they're not just signing off on numbers on a spreadsheet, but they're dramatically affecting the lives of ordinary people. So I would really recommend that you identify some personal story in your life related to power DTE service that you can kind of touch on in those comments.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Don't be shy. You can feel free to put your hand up or just jump on if nobody else is speaking.
Is there somewhere too that we can access the information and sources that were presented in the slideshow?
I can share you out a link for this presentation.
Okay, cool.
Ken, Lauren did ask earlier, if you would expand a bit on My Green Power. Maybe now would be a good opportunity to do that.
Right. So, if My Green Power, as I mentioned, is DTE's offset program for its electric subsidiary. Just as background, DTE is one of the dirtiest major utilities in the country. It generates roughly half of its electricity from burning coal, much of it down in Monroe, and about another 20% from natural gas. So 70% fossil fuel generated electricity, which is astounding. This is why Ann Arbor for Public Power is so insistent or so determined to get out from under this system, because we're going to be burning fossil fuels for electricity through much of this century. DTE knows this. They don't want to be known as a dirty power provider. So they're really pushing this My Green Power program. So to give people an opportunity to offset their emissions. The idea is you pay somewhat more on your bill, and as an accounting matter, your account is assigned to renewable power, usually either a solar farm, maybe a wind farm, somewhere upstate that's in DTE's portfolio. This sounds good. You're paying for, you're actually paying for renewable power. But there's about 6 things I can point out that I find objectionable about this. First of all, you're not getting a payback on your investment. Unlike rooftop solar, where after a certain number of years, you'll actually start making money off your investment. That's not true for My Green Power. But DTE, as I mentioned, is trying to intentionally move you from rooftop solar to My Green Power. A second issue is that many people are assigned to existing renewable energy, and you're not actually helping to pay for new stuff. Even when you are paying for new renewable energy, it's wind or solar that's very hard to site. It takes up farmland or other green fields. Meanwhile, rooftop space is going to waste. There's other problems. So, for example, as I mentioned, you're still getting dirty power. You're just having your account shifted to some remote power somewhere else. You're still getting the same 70% fuel mix, and you're paying for it, because my understanding is that the My Green Power rate structure incorporates DTE's entire fuel mix, not just the renewables. So, like with any offsets, you're not displacing the dirty energy, the fossil fuel combustion. You're just moving your account somewhere else, but you're still feeding the beast, as I like to put it. And finally, as I mentioned before, I don't see any evidence that My Green Power is actually leading to the quicker retirement of these fossil fuel plants. So that's my comment on My Green Power. I'm actually enrolled just so I can keep tabs on it, but I honestly don't recommend that other people do this, because DTE is employing these numbers for publicity purposes, and I think misleading the public grossly.
Thanks, Ken. And yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit of an addendum on that, which is DTE actually has state required amounts of renewable energy that it has to have in its portfolio. what you are paying into with My Green Power is counting towards that state requirement, right? So this is money that's going into account to support renewable power, but they would have to have that renewable power capacity regardless, right? So you're essentially subsidizing them for a state requirement. Dragon, you've got a question there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the proposal is really so bad as Ken described, unfavorable to customers, bad for the future with cleaner energy, why would the commission ever approve it? Are they afraid of something? Do they have something to lose, or what? Because it seems like clear the answer they should give if that's really, especially for solar customers, if that's what the proposal is.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess we'll find out in November when we get the final result, when we get the final ruling. DTE will not get everything it's asking for. So I think they're taking the strategy of ask for such an unreasonable amount of bad stuff, from my point of view, that they'll at least get some of it or most of it from the MPSC. They're not penalized for asking for the moon here. But beyond that, I don't really understand. I don't really know the politics of the Michigan Public Service Commission. These are 3 people who are appointed by the governor. I don't know how favorably inclined they are towards DTE and other investor-owned utilities. Maybe more than we want. Maybe DTE knows this. If other people have any ideas, please chime in. Again, it's a good question, and it's not something I really can answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess just a point of chiming in is that I'm not a total expert on this, but I do know that DTE is one of the biggest lobbyers in Lansing. So while this may be bad for the public, it's cheaper for them to spend lots of money in Lansing bribing politicians and getting these unfavorable deals than it is to actually spend money on, upgrading our infrastructure and, moving towards renewable energy. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, Yusuf Rabi, our state rep here in Ann Arbor, sadly going to be termed out pretty soon, but he'll still be on county commission, has spoken to this quite well in the past. There's actually a video up on Ann Arbor Public Power's website that you can view where he goes into details about the effects the lobbyists have had on bills that he's tried to pass, such as correcting the issues with net metering. But there's also a certain amount of the MPSC tends to have a kind of a biased, set of people talking to them, right? They're talking to people from within the industry, and there's a certain amount of this is just seen as normal, right? The MPSC tends to kind of find a middle ground between what DTE is asking for and everything else, right? And they just see that as just kind of the norm of maintaining their position there, right? So, and also, a lot of the excuse that they tend to give is, oh, well, our hands are tied by the legislature, right? There are certain things that the legislature has passed that influence the decisions that they're supposed to be making. And really, if we wanted to dramatically change the way that DTE operates, it's going to need to be done with legislation. But to Elena's point earlier, that's very difficult to do when DTE lobbies so heavily in Lansing. They're one of the biggest lobbying forces in the state, which is another reason why, to kind of tie it back into Ann Arbor Public Power, why we believe that this campaign is so important. Because if we can successfully municipalize, we'll severely defang one of the worst entities legislatively in the state, right? They fund politicians that have been supporting the Secure My Vote campaign, which is an issue that Defend Black Voters Coalition has taken a major issue with, right? Which would dramatically reduce voter access within the state of Michigan, on top of being behind pretty much every anti-climate bill out there, and just really just leading to a less democratic and a less environmentally responsible state. So.
Yeah, I would just add, I would just add that, yeah, Elena, you're absolutely right. DTE is a power when it comes to influencing legislation. Now, the MPSC is supposed to be independent of all that. You know, this is an administrative process, not a legislative process. And DTE can't lobby these three individuals. You know, they can make their official case, which they've done voluminously. But this is a supposedly impartial three-person panel. Obviously, there is no such thing in actuality, but I don't think any of us knows how the MPSC is going to rule on this case. It's kind of a toss-up, and that's why public input really matters.
More questions from the audience? We'll accept short comments as well if you'd like to give them. Actually, I missed this. Oh yeah, Zachariah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I came in a bit late, but I was wondering, you mentioned that you know, some of the energy bills, some of the money that DTE gets in, you know, collects goes to shareholders as profit. And I was wondering, like, what is there a set percent or like a set amount of money that they can accept as profit, or can they, you know, can they just decide it themselves? And is that affected by this case? I'm not sure if you touched on that.
Yeah, the answer is yes. This is tightly regulated. DTE Electric is asking for a 10.25% return on equity for the money that they get from us. In other words, they're clearing 10.2, you know, for every $100 that we pay them in our rates, for every $100 that they spend from the money they collect from us, they get to keep $110.25. So they're guaranteed that profit. And that's an increase over 9.9% now. So yeah, it's a fixed amount. DTE has other business segments. It has gas, it has energy trading, it has industrial services, and gas is regulated, but the other stuff isn't. And so they also make money off of those business units. But yeah, they're guaranteed a 10% plus profit, or they will be.
Yeah, which I think is a really important thing to know, you know, just from the Ann Arbor Public Power perspective, right? This is one of the reasons why this investor-owned utility model tends to fail in comparison to the publicly owned models, right? Is because they're getting this guaranteed money off the top, right? That's not going towards anything related to your service or reliability or investment in their infrastructure. That's going straight to shareholder profits. And typically when you think about a market-based system, well, yeah, they get a profit, but then there's this competitive element where they're, you know, incentivized to try to do better and innovate and things like that, right? Kind of the basis of capitalist model, but that's not even there in this case, right? They're a state enforced monopoly. They're really, other than the one exception that Ann Arbor Public Power has identified where the city can municipalize, there is no other option for where you get your power from. So DTE takes advantage of that, right? They try to squeeze every dollar that they can out of you, and some of that is not investing in their infrastructure, and others is lobbying to try to be able to just take more. Linda.
Yes, I had a question regarding the source of DTE's energy. We're saying 50% is coming from coal, 20% from natural gas. Does that imply that 30% is coming from renewables? Or can we further carry that out? What are there other sources that we could account for?
Yeah, excellent question. Yeah, there's the Fermi nuclear plant in Monroe, which accounts for about 15 to 20% of their total power output. And the renewables, depending on how it's accounted for, is between 10 and 15% of their portfolio right now. So I think that all adds up.
Yeah. And actually, it was may have heard mentioned, is there any, is trash incinerating, is that still a source of energy for DTE?
Yeah.
If it is, it's very little.
It's about 0.68% of their power generation. And that is all able to be found on DTE's website.
And how bad is it for, what are the rules from DTE about people who already have solar or have batteries or have batteries? How bad is it going to be for us?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on this, but here's my understanding. If you installed solar before 2016 or earlier, you're good to go. You get the full retail rate back for all the solar that you give back to the grid.
Right.
People after 2016 are getting 50 cents on the dollar. And when they're under the program that came in when they eliminated net metering, it's called Rider 18. And now with this new program, my understanding is if the MPSC approves this new rate class, everybody will be paying this new charge, which will be roughly $100 a month.
I just have to say, my solar batteries, my solar panels don't generate $100 worth of electricity a month. It just seems like, how could they possibly do that? But you're not the person writing the laws, so.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. And I mean, it's not a set form. It's not like a set dollar amount. That's estimates based off that Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association actually did some really good research to come up with those estimates because they're pretty convoluted how these work. But it isn't necessarily based off of your solar power as a solar generation, as I understand it either. It's just essentially a punitive rate class, right? So just your normal energy use is punished. You have to pay the rate at peak generation all the time, as opposed to at peak generation when people would normally pay it.
In which case I have to learn how to use my batteries more to offset that.
Mhm.
And what's so crazy is this is truly the no good deed goes unpunished
Right.
plan, because there's not even a grandfather. So if someone made the investment in 2015 to do as much as they possibly could to electrify everything and power it with renewables and efficiency, as we should all be doing if we're trying to have any hope of forestalling the climate apocalypse, anyone who has done that will now get to pay roughly $100 a month for having done so. It's truly outrageous.
And it seems so anti what the Biden bill is just trying to do now of encouraging solar. So it just seems like it should be illegal.
And hopefully it will be, but if it isn't, we do have an out, and that's municipalization. So
Absolutely.
along with Ann Arbor for Public Power, because if we have our own muni, we get to decide that sort of thing, not DTE.
Good one. All right.
Yeah, let me just add that this is getting technical, but this new rate class is voluntary unless the MPSC grants DTE's proposal to raise the cap on distributed generation from the current 1% to 3%. Then it becomes mandatory. Then DTE says it will only raise that cap if all customers are forced into that rate class. So yeah, that's the devil's condition for raising the cap.
Well, I think
yeah.
it gives such a great entree to us for Ann Arbor for Public Power. I mean, how could you want them?
Yeah, I mean, DTE is kind of its own our own best advocate in terms of why municipalization is a good option.
Right.
But
I hope it doesn't happen, but if it does, I think we can use it.
for sure. Okay, well, we're a little bit over now. I don't want to hold people over too much, but if any of you have any questions at all that you think of in the interim, feel free to email them over to AnnArborPublicPower@gmail.com. You can also check out our website for any more information at all. And if you'd like to get involved in the campaign, please go ahead and reach out to us on that same email, and we'll have an organizer reach out to you because we desperately need people. So thank you all.